All right, it's been a long time since I've made a podcast, so I'm going to go ahead and make one tonight. And before I get started, let me do a quick prayer. I'm going to start doing that. God, I just pray for the few people who listen to this. I pray that there would be some wisdom that you impart to them, not necessarily because of anything I said, but just because they took the time to listen. I just pray, Father, that you bless them for doing that. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, um, so that's my goal is to put something out there that's not just noise, but actually is of value. So anyway, there's a political maxim that I'm sure has been come up long before I ever came up with it, but it goes something like this. If the right people don't fix a problem, the wrong people will. So if you're from the left-leaning perspective in this election, obviously Trump being elected is like your nightmare scenario. And what I'd like to do is point out that there were a lot of problems, a lot of conditions that enabled Trump to get elected that the left should have addressed and didn't. And I think conservatives will gain some insight, I hope, in listening to this as well, because they oftentimes make the same mistakes. And I think it will also explain a little bit how the left has really built up this huge boogeyman called Trump that doesn't really exist the way they think he does. But the logical conclusion is that they absolutely must fight him with every tooth and nail because they've demonized him and those who support him, and I want to go into that a little bit. First of all, I'd been thinking about this for a while, but then I watched an excellent video by Jonathan Pye, President Trump, How and Why. If you're a liberal, conservative, independent, anarchist, whatever, I'd suggest watching that on YouTube. The guy's got some pretty good insights. He's, I guess, some kind of English correspondent, and he does a little bit correspondences, but then before and after he'll film these diatribes that come from a left-leaning perspective, but they're usually worth a listen. So this one, President Trump, How and Why, basically blames Trump being elected squarely at the Democrats and the left's feet. And I highly recommend watching that. Once again, it's Jonathan Pye. You can find him on YouTube. President Trump, How and Why. You probably just put that in Google and find the video. Well worth the watch. But anyway, I'm going to expand on his comments a little bit and add my own. So here are 11 things that I came up with just in the 5 minutes before I started recording this. Been kind of batting around a little bit that I think that the left really needs to look at. Again, that political maxim, if you don't want to hear me ramble, just remember this. If the right people don't fix a problem, the wrong people will. So I'm going to identify 11 factors that allowed Trump to be elected that I would put squarely at the Democrats or the left's feet. Number one, insulting everyone and considering insulting or labeling people as political dialogue. You know, someone says something they don't like, they immediately call that person a racist, a sexist. There's like 10 labels that are like the ultimate sins in the left's worldview, and it's all bad stuff if it's legit. But I think somewhere along the line, a lot of people on the left got in the habit of just being able to toss these insults out or label people a certain way, and immediately they get their way in a political argument. So they start using this. It's what I call inflating the race card. Calling everyone a racist, it demeans and diminishes real instances of racism because it throws out a bunch of noise by calling everybody a racist when most people that support Trump are not racist. And doing the same type of things with sexism, with homophobia, whatever have you. It used to be that in the culture war, it came about that labeling people like that was just the ultimate thing that you wanted to avoid. So it was like this left-wing super weapon that they could use against anybody. And they did, and they misused it, and it angered a lot of people. The basket of deplorables doesn't necessarily like to be called that, especially when they don't deserve it. A lot of people voted for Trump for very good reasons. I myself am a Trump supporter. I don't consider myself racist or a lot of these other labels that are out there. But yet I have leftist family members that they won't say it to my face, but if push comes to shove, their ideology would kind of force them to label me like that, just so their worldview, and I'll get into this later, can kind of remain intact. And that's kind of a dangerous thing. Another thing, number 2, moral hypocrisy. Now, there was that, this mainly relates to sexism regarding Trump. Now, Trump had that recording by one of the Bush relatives that's from 2005 where he said some very bad things that no one is saying that he said was like great or anything like that. But I have to be honest, and I hope you're honest too. 90% of the males out there, and that's just a number I've pulled out of my hat, have said worse or similar. And I'll use an example of one of my extended relatives was talking about how it was such a horrible thing, where I've heard him in the past say worse things. His friends that he hangs out with treat women like dog meat. And yet he was just teeing off on what this 2005 recording that Trump did as, like, again, the most hideous evil thing that anyone could do, when he and his friends are just as guilty of it. And you have, Hillary saying all sorts of horrible things that came out in WikiLeaks and other sources, calling minorities the N-word and all sorts of stuff, and the left just was blind to that. They just wouldn't acknowledge it, even though it was like well documented. So there was a lot of hypocrisy on the left, and people kind of got tired of that. Just like in biblical days, to use an analogy, people got tired of the Pharisees, or were constantly putting burdens on them, and I'll flush this out in another point later, this analogy a little bit. But people just got burnt out on that. It's like, no, we're done with kind of political correctness, and I'll get into that more. But right now, just the hypocrisy that we saw, where they're putting these standards up that they themselves can't reach and apply unevenly, and that made people angry. Number 3, tolerating and encouraging the Fourth Estate to become an arm of the Democratic Party. The Fourth Estate is supposed to be independent in theory, and there's a wide variety of reasons why the Fourth Estate is declining in the United States. I think it has to do with a lot of the same problems that every industry in America has. It's hyper concentration of assets owned by a limited number of groups. I think right now something like 6 corporations, I forget if it's print media and talk radio, but a small number of corporations, and it grows smaller, as time goes by, own most of the media outlets in the United States. And it's a similar problem with everything, with fast food restaurants, with car manufacturers. And what they do is, once they own everything, they try to maximize profits. And I'm going to tangent a little bit here, so bear with me. I'll try to get through this quick, but I don't want to lose my thoughts. So journalists today that work in the corporate media setting aren't that well supported. I don't think they're paid all that well when they start off. They don't maybe have the backing, and this is a guess, I can't prove this, and the resources that they did in the past from their news agencies. So what's happened is government has taken advantage of this, and especially the Obama administration, where they can kind of fill the gap. They'll provide you with the leaks. They'll allow you access to certain figures so you don't have to do the footwork, because maybe you don't have the connections, being a college grad with a journalism degree thrown in to Washington, D.C. So the Obama administration will help you along. They'll invite you to all these parties where you can mix and mingle with all the various bureaucrats. And that's all valuable for media people to get stories. But the thing is that's all carrot on the stick. You anger the government can yank that. So it's a means of control, but unfortunately, again, because corporate media is concentrated in media, companies don't maybe pay their reporters as much, there's not as much support, you're kind of left on your own. So there's an incentive for reporters to take what the government is offering, and it totally compromises their ability to remain impartial. Because if you do, you don't get invited to the party. If the leaks dry up, you don't get called on for questions anymore. You get shunned by your peer group. And this is another part of that, where the left tolerated the Fourth Estate becoming an arm of the Democratic Party. There's all sorts of incestuousness. I mean, there always has been in D.C. between the D.C. press corps and government, but it was just taken up to a new level under the Obama administration, where there's all these people that are kind of interlocking directorates, political science term, where people flip from working at a news media to working for the Obama administration and vice versa. There's kind of some permeability where people slide back and forth. A lot of marriage tie-ins, and you can research this stuff for yourself, between the major news networks. I like to call them the news mafia, letter mafia news networks, and with the Obama administration. And something, I mean, people have analyzed the media and a lot of times how they give politically, and you'll see these numbers, and this isn't the exact number, this is just pulling from my memory. It was something like 80% or more of the, I think sometimes up into 90% of the DC press corps would give their donations towards the left, the Democratic Party. There's just all these indications of lack of impartiality, and I think that made people mad. It definitely made me angry when it took hackers through WikiLeaks, and I'll comment on that again with another point, but it took them hacking Podesta and the DNC and Hillary Clinton's illegal server to break what all the media was suppressing, all their, back and forth where they run stories by the Democrats, or the Democrats send questions to reporters to ask Trump, where there was total lack of impartiality, and that angered people. People see that as like fascism growing before them, and people like me who don't like indicators of fascism, and I'll get into that with Trump too, hopefully I'll remember to comment that on the end, don't like it, and I'm automatically going to be set against it, and the left just tolerated that, and they shouldn't have done that, because again, it angered people. I think the media, trust for the media now is something like, 94% of Americans don't trust the mainstream media. That is both horrible for our republic and horrible for the media. I mean, in this day and age, there's a whole bunch of different sources that we can source from, and one of the big complaints is, who vets this information. But usually, I think from a political science perspective, when conspiracy theories start gaining a lot of credence, trust for the mainstream media goes to a low. The nation kind of no longer has this official narrative, and so there's lots of instability. It's definitely a sign of instability, and it's not good long term for democracy. And I think the left tolerated the media becoming corrupt and co-opted because they thought it would suit their interest, and it's blown up in their face and got Trump elected, partially in my view, because people just quit listening to him. They wanted to be a mouthpiece for Hillary, and people were like, I can sense this, so I'm just going to vote against you. Not a lot of people, but enough. And again, we're going through multiple points here, and if you start adding them all up, I think we see why Trump got elected. Number 4, allowing bigotry against Christians and basically white men. I don't talk about race that much just because I don't really care. To me, I don't even care if people make racist comments at home or whatever. It's how people treat me and how I treat other people. When I see somebody, if they judge me by who I am, then I'm cool. Like if I fail in my life and they judge me, oh, this guy's a loser because I acted like a loser, I'm okay with that. But if someone looks at me and judges me by things that I have nothing to do with really, then that makes me angry. And it seems like the left has taken their battle for good things, racial equality, women's suffrage, and continued equality of pay and rights for everybody. Those type of things, the left was solidly there, and I would argue true conservatives were too. But they took it to where it should be and are now trying to push it farther, again, using those labels to tarnish people, to say people are racist or have privilege, and they apply all these things again unevenly. Some of the most privileged people I have seen are the ones that are protesting against privilege. You look at the media again, it's like 90% white liberal people. Rich, went to the best schools, could afford to be interns and not get paid to get into the business for a significant amount of time because they're rich. The money doesn't matter as much. And going on that, well, I'll say that for another point. There's nothing wrong with being a Christian, and it's almost like they're starting to get so bold and so lost in their ideology and so willingness to use any weapon, whether they should use it or not, that they're trying to attack Christians and trying to attack, rather than promoting we're all equal in God's eyes, we're all one blood, as the Bible says, and everybody should be given an equal opportunity. They instead collapse into saying, oh, because you're of a certain color, bad, you've been privileged. I got to tell you, my ancestors never owned slaves. A lot of privilege involved a lot of my family members getting killed in past wars. I had all sorts of, my grandfather had all sorts of cousins that were killed in the Navy. A lot of people have died for the rights of this country. This country was never perfect. But I would argue that rather than trying to create new imbalances to try to fix the old imbalances, there should just be a way. The push should be to try to give everyone equal opportunity, not equal result. To open the doors for disadvantaged people. I'd like to take race completely out of government statistics and do it all on socioeconomic levels. And, if you're poor, you get a scholarship. If you're rich, you don't. Race and all this stuff isn't out of it. So if it's true that certain groups are disadvantaged socioeconomically, that'll play out without even having to bring race into it. And again, this is something people can go back and forth on me with, and that's fine. But I think it was taken too far, and a lot of people started going, wait a second here, I'm all for equality and everything, but now I'm starting to, it's going beyond that, where I'm being reduced to a second-class citizen, and no, I'm not going to be for that. You could argue that it's just to make up past indifferences, whatever. I'll just say this. The vast majority of the people in that, Christian group, not all, kind of middle America, say, not let's leave the Christian out of it, but middle America, they're not sold on this whole idea that, that they've got to be put down so others can be pushed up. It's more, I think they're sold on the idea that everybody should be treated fairly and everybody should have a chance. And the left went too far and, again, ticked a lot of people off. Number 5, tolerating a corrupt corporatist Hillary because they thought the left, it would help her cause, while ignoring the facts that it would not. I mean, again, the Democratic Party is essentially part of the uniparty. This applies to Republicans and mainstream Republicans and Democrats. They get to D.C., they might have all these great ideals. They see that in order to actually have an impact, because the system's already corrupted long before they get there, that if they're going to have any kind of impact at all, they kind of have to sell out part way. If I'm going to be able to do, I'm not going to be able to do anything good at all because there'll be this giant wall in front of me. But if I sell out a little bit, then I can maybe do a little good here or there. And over time, it totally corrupts everybody coming in. Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely. The people in D.C. behind the curtain, I would say the Uniparty that had us up, we're talking trillions of dollars of allocations, excuse me, and budget money, all sorts of tricks they can do. If you want to be on this committee, you got to play ball. Else you're there, but you're not going to be able to give any goodies back to your district. The district elites, who the dude before, even though they didn't like and got rid of them, handed all sorts of goodies. They're going to say, well, this guy or woman sucks worse. We're going to get rid of them and put somebody back in that'll give us the goodies. So it's almost like you enter into this corrupt system, and you can't. It's really hard to fight. But I would argue the Democrats just totally looked the other way because they thought they had power. They said, Obama's in there, Hillary's going to be next. And when people started pointing out, Wall Street's actually bankrolling Hillary and bankrolled Obama. Citibank pretty much picked Obama's cabinet. People just were like, I'm just going to close my ears because, well, it's better than Trump. I'll say this for Trump. He's not controlled by anybody but himself. And then you can say that's good or bad. It has the potential to be both, quite honest. So I think I would argue that, look what Hillary did to Bernie. And I'll raise this up on other points, I think, the way I pushed it out. We'll get to that, I guess. All right. Factual safe spaces. In order to get their agenda across, the left was willing to sacrifice truth. And I'm not saying this is an exclusive thing to the left or the Democrats. The Republicans do it too. Let me just kind of go through a couple things that popped into my head as I was picking this up. Quietly in 2014, I believe it was, the government just decided to change GDP calculations. It's like, our economy sucks. It's not getting as good as we thought it was. So we're just going to change the way we calculate GDP. We're going to fix that number so it'll be higher. In fact, I would argue that if you look at a modern GDP statistic, and again, I'm not an economist. This is just stuff I've kludged together with my little brain. But this should at least give you some stuff to look at. Like, hey, search that the GDP did get changed. So, and you might hear some noise. I don't do these live anymore because my house is like a circus. I don't have like a little room I go into. I have my little niche in the living room where I worked out of. I got dogs and all sorts of stuff, cats meowing, people coming and going. So I've got something that I can pause and maybe edit a little bit later and then push up the live. If you hear some stuff, that's my new dog munching on a bone over in the corner being loud. But anyway, where was I? Okay, changing GDP calculations. Go ahead and check it out. 2014, they did. So every time you see a GDP number, just with me, I reduce it by like 1.5, 2 points. So in my mind, and I haven't, I'm not an economist, so I can't fully lay this out in like a equation form. But I would subtract like 1.5 to 2 points on every GDP figure you see. Plus, they always go back and revise them down later, typically. So, oh yeah, it was looking good this month, and then 3 or 4 months later, actually, upon further review, that month really wasn't that good because no one's watching now. So we're going to revise it down 0.5 point or whatever. Common techniques. The joke of the unemployment numbers. Oh yeah, unemployment's like 6%. Well, then why is food stamp usage going through the roof? And why are part-time jobs, again, what is a good job? People might be working more. A lot of the jobs that are created, oh yeah, we created, 300,000 or 3 million new jobs this quarter. But what kind of jobs are they? They're part-time service jobs. That people have to work 2 or 3 of those. And let's talk about Obamacare a little bit here and factual safe spaces. Well, before we get to that, let me finish up on the joke of unemployment numbers. So you look at people that are now discouraged workers. It's like, well, the numbers make us look bad, so we'll just change the numbers. So now we're not going to account discouraged workers. Or if you threw those in, there's like close to 100 million of those. The unemployment rate's vastly understated, probably 25, 30%. And then the people that have jobs have part-time jobs or working 2 or 3 of those part-time jobs. I mean, if you're blessed like I am, and hopefully like you are, where you've got solid employment, even though it maybe isn't the greatest job in the world, you should be thankful for that, because a lot of people don't have that. And well, we'll get into that more later. The joke of deficits. I can't tell you how many times I saw this new math introduced by the administration talking about how they really were reducing the deficits, and Obama was making great progress, and all we had to do is just keep trusting him, when it was a friggin' lie. I mean, I'm not sure what the deficit or the trade, our current total budget deficit is, but it's something, I believe it's close to $20 trillion. It essentially doubled under Obama, and it doubled under Bush, but no one's really stopping it. And I think that angered people too. It's like, we can't keep spending like crazy. And then taking that into account, I'll get to that. Actually, I'll add that one in at the end, immigration. Another one was mega trade deals are great. We have all these people out of work because something like 70,000 factories that employed 500 people or more have left the United States in the last 10, 15 years. Ever since China got most favored nation trading status, and NAFTA and GATT took hold. The dog's eating something. Hey, stop. We've seen all sorts of blue-collar jobs just disappear. Middle America. All these blue-collar people up in Michigan, and the Democrats wonder why they lost Michigan. All these people were hurting and saying they were hurting, and the Democrats were happy to go out and say, oh, we're going to help you. But in 8 years, they didn't get any help, and then Hillary comes along and says, there's all these CISPA, SHAFTA passed, which is a free trade Korean trade deal, all these other trade deals. It's like a blitzkrieg of alphabet soup of trade deals, in the hopes that the couple that will get blocked, they'll get a bunch of other ones through, and then the ones that get blocked, they rename, hold it. I call them zombie initiatives. They wait a little while, and then these initiative trade deals rise from the dead. Like everyone says, oh, Trump won, the Trans-Pacific Partnership's dead. No, it's not. It might go away for a little while. It might reemerge as one thing. It might reemerge as 2 or 3 things. It'll have different acronyms, but as long as the EU remains a viable entity, and China and all these other groups that are part of this pact, they'll keep pushing it. It's a deep state agenda item, and it's not going away. So basically, the left, just like the right, but the left held the executive at this time, lied about all this stuff. They changed rather than fix the problems. They just manipulated things to make it look like the problems were fixed, so they could say that the problems were fixed when no problems were fixed. And it's probably the same with the Republicans before them. But people saw that. They're not dumb. And they go, oh, if we elect Hillary, it's going to be just absolutely more of the same. Where Trump, it's kind of like a Hail Mary pass. You don't know what he's going to do, but there's a chance it could be destructive, but it could be very positive too. Number 7, tolerating corporate ownership of their party and government by looking the other way. I kind of talked a little bit about that before, but basically, how many, they came in and with Occupy, Obama with Occupy Wall Street support. Supposedly Hillary's carrying on that. And they did nothing. Obama came into a really bad situation. And I think, we had this $800 billion of TARP money set aside. It's actually a ridiculous percentage. It was sold to help banks or mortgages. An actual ridiculous percentage of that actually went to helping mortgages. Something like, I don't remember the number, but it was either like 15% or 3%. Those numbers pop in my head. You'll have to be a brain and verify that for yourself. But yeah. And Obama came in, he could have fixed a lot, instead of all this money being loaned to other banks. We don't know exactly, they asked. There's that Grayson. Grayson's kind of a jerk, but he was on the right track asking Federal Reserve representatives, where'd all these trillions go? And they're like, we don't know. We're not authorized to look. Oh, really? I'll leave the Federal Reserve for a whole nother debate. But it's amazing to me now we have all these protesters that are protesting corporatism and corporate control when Hillary Clinton, to anybody with any brains, was an obvious corporatist candidate. So were all the Republicans that were running. Jeb, Romney trying to slip in there in the last minute and do some kind of trickery. I mean, all these people were corporatist stooges. Again, Trump was the only one that wasn't. Now, whether that's a good thing or bad, because Trump was his own corporation. You can say his corporation sucked. People say, well, if he just took that loan from his dad and put it into the stock market and an index account, he'd actually be worth more money, blah, blah, blah. There's all this back and forth. I don't know what really to believe, to be honest there. I just know at the end of it all, Trump built a lot of buildings. And I'm sure he was involved in some shade. There's no doubt about that. But he's open about it. He's like, yeah, I abuse the system. That makes me the perfect guy to fix the system because I know exactly where the abuse happens. And some people get that argument. Some people say, oh, he's just another snake. Time will tell. But we know that Hillary wasn't going to fix any of those stuff. How do we know that? Because the people who use all those loopholes gave all the money that Hillary needed for her campaign. That's how we know it wasn't going to be fixed, because they own her. They don't own Trump, and people could see that, and it mattered. Number 8, Dems becoming the party of royalty. And, it's her turn. Like, we don't need any more Bushes. We don't need any more Kennedys. We don't need any more Clintons. Like, I already see some articles about them trying to groom Chelsea for a congressional seat. What is Chelsea going to do? What are they going to carpetbag her like they did Hillary? Put her in a state somewhere where there's a weak candidate and then ram her through and then start grooming her? Soros is going to die eventually, but whatever his son or whatever minions behind the scenes that are part of Team Soros take over. It's just this royalty that we have was not envisioned by the Founding Fathers, I don't think. Now, you could argue the Founding Fathers kind of envisioned royalty a little bit when they said that basically only landowners and educated people should be able to vote, which I kind of see some logic to. I'm not saying we should reverse what's been changed, but, the more stake you have in the system, the more vote attachment you're going to have. I mean, one person, I forget who it is, who said it, the famous quote, where, once the public realizes that they can vote themselves gifts from the treasury, you're pretty much doomed, because that's all anybody's ever going to do. They're all going to just carve it up, and we kind of see that with the $20 trillion deficit. But we'll get into that. That's a lot of corporatism's absolutely at fault at that as well. Rich people, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, it's her turn. And then the Democratic Party pretending like there was really an election. It was a foregone conclusion that Hillary was going to be the candidate. Bernie came in and put in a good effort, and if things were fair, he probably would have won. And again, a lot of those Bernie supporters stayed home. That's the left's fault. They shouldn't have tolerated a corrupt Democratic Party like that would allow essentially royalty to happen. Like, oh, we're going to play like this is a democracy, like these other candidates. I don't even remember the bozos that were running against her. There was that one Massachusetts guy who I didn't think much of. There was Bernie. There was Webb, who I think Webb just forgot which party he really belonged to. He was the old school Blue Dog Dems, the same people that a lot of the Democrats disparaged that didn't vote for him. That those people like James Webb used to be solid Democratic supporters, and the Democratic Party moved so ideologically left and tolerated so much corruption that the James Webb part of the party bailed, said later, no thanks. So that Democratic Party becoming this corrupt machine of the Clintons, this rather than a true, everyone runs and gets a chance. And the Republican Party's pretty much the same way on this. But since the Democrats were in power and since Trump was such an outsider, the anger didn't affect Trump. It actually helped him. Whereas the Democrats doing the same old thing, it really hurt them. Number 9, this one's a big one. Imposing moral fascism. People just kind of got sick with political correctness. Again, because of the overuse of labels that didn't apply to people. All right. There was a little break in the action there. I actually paused. Totally forgot where it was. I think I was on imposing moral fascism, so I'll just pick it up there. Sorry if there was a break. Shows the true indie nature of this podcast here. Dog going crazy, got a phone call. Interestingly enough, someone asking me roughly pretty much what I'm talking about right now. So number 9, imposing moral fascism. People just kind of got sick of the left thinking that they won the cultural war in all these different areas, and then it being okay for them to be fascist about it. A, they didn't win. It's still in flux. There's a lot of issues that are still being worked out in our society. And B, this idea that you have to conform to their way of thinking, else you're evil. And again, that what was his name? The video I recommended in the very beginning, Jonathan Pye, he does an excellent job of, and again, that's Jonathan Pye, How and or President Trump, How and Why, recommending that. Talks about, you can't be this moral fascist and label anyone who demonizes anyone who thinks differently about what you think without having any kind of real debate about it. Assuming anyone who thinks differently than you is ignorant or evil, that isn't the case. And this is a lesson that Republicans can learn as well and keep in mind. It makes people angry. And as this Jonathan Pye guy pointed out, once you're in the voting booth, you shut that curtain, no one's watching you, and you can vote the heck how you want. That's one of the reasons I think the polls got it wrong. The other is I think the polls just lie. And it's a psyop, and it's organized. Nielsen said they weren't going to do presidential polls this year, and I think that's because they realized there would be all this massive pressure to manipulate the polls, and they said, no thanks. And as my friend pointed out, watch the polls right before the election. They'll start tilting heavily towards Trump because they'll try to salvage some credibility, and that's exactly what happened. So it's both a lie and both misleading the tea leaves because they're so blind. They assume that, the left assumes that his cause is so just and so righteous that who could be an idiot and not think like they are? Well, apparently half the country. And if you subtract the probably millions of illegal votes that were cast by illegals in this country, because there's no checks on that, the Democrats make sure of that with voting ID and other things, and the voter fraud that went on, I captured as much of that as I could on my Twitter account, mostly micro tales, but when you add all those little things up, I think you can see patterns of systemic voting. It's interesting how calibration errors always favor the Democrats, on these electronic voting machines. Oh, I tried to cast my vote for Trump and it wouldn't let me. It kept putting Hillary. Oh, that's a calibration error. I've never heard of a story where somebody goes in and says, well, I tried to vote for Hillary and it only let me vote for Trump, or I tried to vote for the Democratic candidate. It's always favoring the left, which makes me, considering Soros owns like voting machines that were deployed to 16 states, another company that deployed voting machines to 22 states, was a heavy donor to Hillary. Numerous hackers, even Edward Snowden, came about and demonstrated how easy it is to hack voting machines. A lot of them are old. You have people, caught filling in on ballots, mail-in ballots, where things were left blank. They were filling them in for the Democrats, or a lot of overprinting of absentee ballots so that they could be used for nefarious purposes. A lot of stuff will kind of play out. That's one thing I'm very glad that Trump got elected, because I hope, if nothing else, that he can start dealing with systemic voter fraud and having an ID. Everything in this society you got to get an ID for. You want to pick up some pictures at Photomat, you got to have an ID. I don't think it's this huge thing to have an ID. And I think it's racist to assume that certain ethnic groups are incapable of searching the internet in this day and age or having an ID when everyone does. That's the left's reason for not having voting ID. And again, that's more corruption that the left tolerates and promotes to get their way. I think that they know that without strong voter ID laws, people will break the law and vote multiple times, or the dead will vote. And because it helps their cause, they're cool with it. It's like, oh, okay. The ends justifies the means. And again, a lot of people see that and they're like, this party kind of sucks. I'm going to vote for the other guy. The moral fascism in academia is just getting too much. People see that. Left pisses everybody off. It's like, just today I was reading some article about them wanting to pull Thomas Jefferson quotes. That's a founding father. None of the founding fathers were perfect. But essentially, we're having this slow motion communist revolution taking over our country that's, and that's my bias showing, that I'm sure if I said that to every leftist, oh, you commie, they'd hate me and not vote for me, and just flip that in reverse of what happened to Trump. But there is a little bit of truth to that, I think. And people, again, got tired of it. They got tired of the snowflakes, the safe spaces, and I'll be honest with you, the effeminization of men. I look at the dudes going around. I saw the study. It's like, compared to my generation, I'm tail end of Gen X. The newer kids coming up are weak. They're less coordinated. Some of that has to do with technology and, rather than people going outside, they sit around and play video games and stuff. But it's kind of like you look at the fashions and they're kind of becoming like, dude, what are you doing? It's like, hey, whatever. But, people see that and they look at the left and they see that as like this virtue to try to look like an androgynous weakling person is like the new good thing. And they're like, no, these freaks, I'm not going to vote for them, And look at the FCC, Beyond academia, the FCC has been talking about, they're like one vote away. There's like a couple Republicans in there that are holding the line from them saying, oh, we got to regulate talk radio. Oh, we got to make sure that all viewpoints are heard. These are all code word programs for trying to destroy talk radio. I'd say the conservative pushback, counter-revolution that's happened over the last 20 years has happened for two reasons: social media, and before social media, and during social media, talk radio. And basically they're saying because most left-wing talk radio can't compete, it just can't. People don't watch it. You have a couple successful people like Don Imus for a long time, but his shows were left, but there was thought involved, and there was also a lot of humor and a lot of non-political stuff too. What was that other guy who used to kind of be the opposite of Sean Hannity? I forget his name. He had a radio show. It wasn't all politics, so they competed a little bit. But in general, the left trying to compete on talk radio is a dismal failure. And it's the free marketplace of ideas. If people aren't interested, that demographic who's driving to work in the morning isn't interested in listening to it, you can't shove it down people's throats. And that's exactly what they're going to try to do, or what's even worse is California tech companies. We had Google, this one really ticked me off. During the first debate, there's really good evidence that Hillary wore an earpiece. In fact, the New York PD said, yes, Hillary was wearing an earpiece. Look that up. You type in Hillary earpiece, because it kind of looked like maybe she wore one in the second debate. I don't think she did, but it was interesting because she didn't need to, because she had all the stuff on her little podium in front of her. But, you look that up, and immediately there's left-wing fact vetting organization, factcheck.org, Polyfact, and all these groups that are supported by left-wing money. Snopes is actually a family group that just leans left, and they get it wrong sometimes. Polyfact, the first thing they did was they said they tried to debunk that she didn't have an earpiece in the second debate, and I'll give that to them. And then they talked about the first debate, how it wasn't really an earpiece, and it was just a glint of light. And they totally failed to mention that the New York Police Department said, "Oh yeah, she was wearing an earring or an earpiece." They're there to check facts. Total biasness in their fact checking, and a couple people again have risen to the challenge. But it's like this one guy's got like a Polyfact bias blog. It's just like one dude against this army of people that are getting money from Ford Foundation, Soros, the usual New World Order type of things. Again, people see that the Democratic Party is co-opted by these groups, and the left just left it alone, And then California tech companies now, saying they're going to be the vetters of what is news and what is not. I don't necessarily want Logan's Run type tech companies run by leftist hipsters that are in their 20s deciding for most of the world what truth is. And I went round and round with one of my friends on the internet. Oh, people don't, get their information from Facebook. That's a joke, blah, blah, blah. Boom, Pew Research. 40% of millennials or 50% of millennials get their information strictly from social media sites like Facebook. It matters. All the people on Twitter that, allow assassinate Trump hashtag to go on for a while, or rape Melina as his wife. I'm pronouncing her name wrong, sorry. That's cool. But all these conservatives that start smacking people up with their points and get up to a certain level, lefties on there go in their safe space rage and go, oh, he made a valid logical point that I can't handle, so I'm going to report this as harassing, and then they cancel the accounts. Now, some people are just jerks both on the left and the right, and they should have their accounts canceled. I'm not arguing that. But there was a lot of instances of shadow banning where they, you look at your numbers, you're getting, for each link you put out there, say you've got a big account with like 100,000 followers, you're getting like 5,000 impressions. And now all of a sudden it goes to 10, and it's 10, 20, 25, or whatever the number was, significantly less for a couple hours. And then boom, it goes up. Well, you got shadow banned. They punished you because you said something they didn't like, and they didn't even let you know. They just did it. That's a common technique. And people see that now. Facebook talking about, the leftists are mad at Facebook because they didn't control or vet the flow of information good enough. They tried to, and they got busted because it was obvious they were biased. They had a bunch of, left-wing California hipsters in there deciding what was right and what was wrong. And people said, call them on it. And so they said, no, we're going to take people out of it and make it algorithmic. And now it's like, well, we got to make further adjustments. Twitter came out today. They've got an improved quotes, reporting tool. And to be fair, it looks mostly like it's just so if people feel offended and they want to remain in their safe bubble, there's additional tools besides blocking. You can block keywords, you can mute threads, that type of thing, so you can remain in your safe bubble. And again, that type of thing too, it's like, when did everybody become such a crybaby? It's like when you go out into the marketplace of ideas and debate, you might lose. You might have points scored against you, and that doesn't entitle you to be rageful. And if you lose in the marketplace of ideas to impose fascism and limit the other side's ability to debate you so that you don't lose and you can feel good about yourself, that's not true debate. And again, I know there's all sorts of bullying and all sorts of like that stuff going on. I'm not really, in Twitter's case, if people want to remain in their safe bubble, I don't have a problem with that. I got more problems with Twitter in other ways. But people saw that. They're like, no. Again, assuming cultural battles were won about everything. It's like, climate change. There's two layers to the climate change onion, and this belongs to a whole different levels of debate. But let's just say this. There is the debate about how much is human activity actually affecting the heat or the coolness of the planet? What is our impact? And then there's the whole other debate, regardless if that impact's good or significant, very significant, absolute catastrophe-ish, or not really affecting things all that much at all. Then the next layer of the onion is, what kind of solutions do you have? It seems like the left, the same left that's owned by the same corporations that are polluting the earth, are the ones proposing the solutions to fix the problem. Let's have this secluded place where everybody flies their private jets to. It's a big party, massive CO2 released, all this pollution, total hypocrisy on the people who go to these things, paid for by all these mega corporations and rich people and New World Order type groups that are all in charge of how the world got all screwed up in the first place with pollution and possibly climate change. They're the ones proposing the solution. And the solution seems to always be the destruction of capitalism, the weakening of personal property rights, the herding of people into anthill cities, smart grids, and basically taking away everyone's freedom, more global governance, less sovereignty, all the things that without climate change, the left would kind of tend to be about. And they're hijacking climate change to push their agenda. Whether you agree with climate change or not, there's probably a whole different array or spectrum of solutions in dealing with pollution and climate change, besides establishing a left-wing global fascist dystopia that controls every aspect of your life to make sure that you're not using more resources than you should be. There's a whole big area in between that and what the left proposes. People saw that. They see the science being manipulated. And again, that liberal safe space, leftist safe space thing, the mainstream media isn't all reporting on this. You have to actually go look for it. But there's all sorts of resistance by scientists to the mainstream view of climate change, and there's all sorts of political resistance, regardless of whether it's true or not, that the solution to fixing it should always be a left-wing global dictatorship and the destruction of the nation state, and change, the discussion of Judeo-Christian values and this embracing this nebulous new religion. Hillary talked about having to change Christianity. And people who are Christians and take the Bible real go, no thanks. All right, second to last, that'll be covered under this. Okay, faulty evidence change. This is where the left is trapped in their own logic, and why a lot of the reasons why Trump run. Trump advocates sexual assault. Now again, that conversation that Trump had, and there's probably more conversations than just that one, shouldn't be held up as a good way to speak about women. I'm not advocating that. What he said was bad, disgusting. But he was more of acknowledging a truth. It's like when you're rich and famous, there are certain types of women that throw themselves at you. And if you're a sexually active guy, you can pretty much do anything that you want to them and they don't complain. You as a feminist might be horrified by that, but I'm pretty sure that if we went to rock stars, if we went to NBA players, NFL players, professional sports players, politicians of a certain gravity of familiarity, actors, I'm pretty sure all of them could, if they would allow themselves to be truthful, pretty much admit that that's a fact, whether you like it, whether it's a good thing or not. Trump was stating that. He didn't say that he's going up to women that don't want his aggressions and doing all this. That's not what he said. But the left, and their zeal to demonize the opposition, takes that and runs with it and says, oh, he advocated sexual assault. What a scumbag. He committed, something against the 10 left-wing commandments. Thou shalt not be racist, thou shalt not commit sexism statement. There's these 10 buzzwords that they always use to demonize people, and they're bad things. I'm not saying they're not. I'm not saying what Trump said was good. I'm just being realistic. The people talk, especially in unguarded moments, and especially when you're a famous guy, like uber famous, and you're dealing with this other guy who's kind of famous, and you want to put him at ease. There's this concept of talking with all the restraints off to show that you're just a dude. Other people have picked up on that. I won't go into that in depth. But basically, what Trump's communicating him is I'm nothing special. You don't have to fear me. I talk gutturally and bass like you. Guys do that. You can argue and say that they don't. They do. This faulty evidence train, like white supremacists, some of them support Trump. Thus, Trump is the king of white supremacists, and all people that support Trump are white supremacists. No. If we're going to apply that kind of logic, there's all sorts of separatist, communist, racist groups on the left, and the left tries to say, people that aren't white can't be racist. They redefine the term. To the average common person, what racism means is that you judge people based on their race and put them down based on their race rather than them as an individual. And that's the definition I stick to. Whatever academia wants to play around so they can play games, so they can do whatever psyops they want to do, that's fine. That doesn't fly with me. And again, the fact that they do that, people like me get angry and think, we're never going to vote for these Democrats or leftists. And again, they lose people. So David Duke, this one dude out of a nation of 320 million people or such, is a bad dude who's a racist. And he says, I like Trump. I don't know how many news outlets picked up on that. Oh, yeah, this racist likes Trump. Why don't you deny Mr. Trump that, you need to come out and, push, say David Duke's a bad dude. Otherwise, you're by de facto essentially accepting his endorsement. So Trump doesn't matter. They still, you still are a white power dude. Again, all the leftist terror groups and all the scumbags on the left, and there's a lot of good people on the left. There's some scumbags on the left. A lot of good people on the right. There's some scumbags on the right. It's just how it is. Bad people kind of fall all over the ideological spectrum. And to claim that because one bad person supports one candidate, thus that candidate is equally as bad as the person that supports him, you have to apply, if you're going to be logically consistent here, you have to apply that for your candidate too, because there's some bad people on the left that supported Obama, that supported Hillary. But the left's like, totally logically inconsistent of that. And again, A equals B, thus B equals Z. It doesn't work that way. Trump's anti-Mexican and Hispanic and anti-immigration. He's married to an immigrant. There's been people who are Hispanic that work for him in high-level positions that came out and said Trump is not anti-Hispanic. What he is anti-illegal immigration. And up until recently, we were a nation of laws. And if you wanted policy change, the way you took care of that was to advocate changing the laws rather than telling the executive to just, go emperor style and just ignore the laws and create presidential decision directives and executive orders that tell agencies to ignore the law. People who understand that law and order should be the goal of society, or one of them, it's like a foundational pillar of stability, get kind of angry when one branch of government, because it suits their interests, just throws off the rule of law. And it's not just executive orders. And again, going back to the fact bubbles, you hear these terms like, well, Obama didn't pass as many executive orders as Bush. The right's all complaining about all these executive orders, but if you look at the number of them, he's actually passed less than Bush. Well, that's because there's this sub thing besides executive orders. I forget what it's called. It might be presidential decision directives. I got that term from somewhere. But there's another thing that's like executive orders, but up until Obama was used for like, we're going to, claim, put the flags up today, or we're going to have red lights in the Rose Garden at the White House. And Obama is using those exactly like executive orders. So again, people pick up on that. This rogue executive, again, the left tolerating the destruction of the branches of government in order to get their way. And people see that as corruption and vote against it. Let's get into Obamacare. Obamacare real quick. I won't dwell on this because that'll come back later. I'm sure there's going to be all sorts of political debates about that, and I might have comments on that later. Plus, I'm going into an hour, and way too long for me to talk. It was sold as this thing that's going to lower your rates. It's not. It's a disaster. But guess what? It was meant to be a disaster because the left wanted to fix the healthcare system, and in their mind, socialized medicine is obviously the answer. So they wanted socialized medicine. They couldn't get it, so they put in Obamacare. I talked to a good friend of mine who hopefully listens to this, told me, and was involved on some level, I'm not quite sure, but some level of lobbying for Obamacare. He basically admitted to me at the time it was designed to fail so they could get single payer / socialist medicine in. All that, in order to get their way, screwed massive amounts of people. It's like, oh, if you're a company and your employee works over, 30 hours a week, you're going to have to cover them with Obamacare. Well, guess what? A lot of employers went to their employees. I know people like this who said, you were working 40 or 35 hours. Guess what? Now you're working 27 and a half. We got to have a little leeway in case you work a little bit overtime to keep you under that 30 hours thing, so we don't have to pick you up with Obamacare and save money. It pushed hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people into having less hours. A lot of those people's incomes were drastically affected by that. A lot of them had to pick up a second or maybe a third job. I remember President Bush, some woman came up, she was working 3 jobs, and he hailed her as this hero. It's like, yeah, that woman's a hero, and I'm all for hard work and stuff. But I don't think life, maybe I'm a slacker or more European on this. I think if you absolutely love what you're doing, go ahead, work 14 or 15 hours a day. Most of us don't fall in that spectrum. It's like work to live or live to work. A lot of us are work to live. In those cases, you don't want to be stuck 60, 70 hours at a workplace. I think you should enjoy life a little bit. I think you should work hard, more importantly, work smart. But when your time's up, you go home. People in the past fought huge battles, talking about white privilege again. There's all these pictures of, little Irish kids in New York that are working in the factory 6-7 days a week, 16, 17 hours a day or 14 hours a day, whatever it was. And, that's their privilege. It's kind of like the same poor people that are being exploited in China right now. I like an 8-hour work week. I might work more than that at times, but I'm good with that. People fought long and hard so that, I could have a life outside of being a wage slave. And Obamacare just trashed a bunch of people. And then this whole thing where you have to have health insurance, prove that you have it, or you got to pay this massive tax. And then you get a bunch of people, I have friends like this, whose income can't really afford Obamacare, but can't really afford, or maybe they can afford it, but it's such a harsh thing that maybe it's really hard for them to do, to pay the fine of not having it. So a lot of the people that Obamacare was supposedly designed to help get stuck working 2 jobs and either can't afford health insurance, afford a really crappy Obamacare package, or have to pay this huge IRS fine that they can't really afford, so they go into debt to the IRS, and that just spirals out. It's a horrible thing, and the left, they just don't care. They're like, eventually we'll fall under its own weight. We know that, and we'll bring in single payer. But in the meantime, in order to get their way, they've dramatically affected the lives of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in a negative way. And people see that, they get mad. So where does this all lead up? All these first 10 things leads to number 11. The left, in order to operate in this culture war to try to get their way on everything, has been forced, or has chosen, maybe is a better way to do it, to demonize the other side and create this huge boogeyman of Trump. With their false evidence chains, their willingness to, A equals B, thus B equals Z, and skipping all the steps in between, their moral hypocrisy, their fascism, their tolerance of corruption, they're bringing in bad candidates, them almost becoming like worshippers of royalty with Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party. Kennedys could be the same way. That they've become this thing that almost has to demonize the other side in order to exist. So in their minds, they create this Trump who's a sexist, biggest anti-gay, even though Peter Thiel's part of his transition team, he already came out and said, it's settled law, which we kind of lied to his base on that a little bit. But I don't think it's any surprise to anybody who was going to do that. So, again, this faulty evidence change, demonizing everything. But they created this boogeyman. Now Trump's this Hitler figure in their eyes. And what do you do when a Hitler figure rises up? You have to resist them. You have to resist them in the street. You have to resist them politically. You have to slap down people. It's even more important that you impose moral fascism. Now, it's not acceptable that you voted for Trump. You got to, shun the person, They have to do that. They're like trapped in their own logic of this fake boogeyman that they created. Or a boogeyman that's from their ideology, if they were open-minded, would be bad. Obviously not their first choice of a candidate, but not this impending doom and gloom person that's coming in that's just going to destroy the world, And we see the fruit of that, a lot of people, and then we got Soros. That's a whole nother issue, going out and buying protesters. See on Craigslist where they're hiring protesters. Oh, that was just Photoshopped. Well, actually, you can send the website to this site called archive.is, and that site takes a screenshot and saves it. So it's independently verifiable. And yes, all those Craigslist ads, a lot of them have gone to archive.is. So it's not Photoshop. Soros and the leftist groups are doing that. So even their rage against Trump and his supporters is mostly fake. But again, it feeds off of it. I had one relative post on social media who I hope listens to this, though don't blame yourself for this, but it kind of shows that there's negative fallout for this. The protesters are protesting, I'm going to stay out of their way so they can deliver their important message, was kind of what my relative said. Now, it wasn't this area, but there was another area where protesters were out delivering their important message, and there was an ambulance with a father there that was trying to get through. It didn't make it, and the father died. That father had a 4-year-old girl. Now, would the ambulance, if there would have been no protesters there, if it would have made it, would the guy have died anyway? I don't know. But I do know the ambulance was held up and the guy was died. I also seen video where some poor girl out protesting on the freeway, because in her mind that's what you do, and some car, I don't know if they didn't see them until they were on top of them or just was an a-hole and didn't care, drove by and smacked that person. So there's people being hurt by these protesters delivering their important message at $15 an hour from Soros that are bussed into the area, a lot of them. And, you've got this fake protest, you got a lot of people that are just idiots that would be attracted to that no matter what side it's on, just because some people are into that, stirring up violence. And you have this demon that has been created in the minds of the left that they are responsible for by all the 10 points that I raised and more than that, turning off millions of voters to them, and they're shocked that they lost. And when they lost, they're so stuck in their own moral fascism that they have to continue forward demonizing and even doubling down rather than just admitting defeat, trying to learn from it, trying to reopen dialogue. I actually have a good friend, that friend who told me about Obamacare. he's on the right idea. I posted something right before the election. He said, regardless of who wins, the real question is how we can start dialoguing again. He kind of phrased it in a way that I didn't really like. But his core point, taking the phraseology out of it, was good. It's like, how do we quit building each other up into monsters? There's enough real monsters in the world out there that we don't need to be creating ones in our mind and being ready and being in combat mode all the time. We're just adding to our problems by doing that. We're breaking down civil discourse, which is important in a republic and a democratic society to maintain, even with people that disagree with you. And if we demonize the other side so much, or if we know there are problems, going back to that political maxim, and we just ignore them, we can expect that the side that we don't want to fix them will come in and try to do it. Those are lessons learned, and I think they apply to both sides. And I'm pretty harsh on the left. I know the right isn't perfect. I know that myself isn't perfect all the time. This election has been a huge drain on me. My work has suffered. I've kind of ignored my wife. I've ignored my animals a little bit. I've kind of been sick, like borderline sick a lot. And, when the election was over and Trump won, Trump was my boy, I wasn't glad. I was just like, I was just too exhausted to have even, any emotion. Plus, I thought Trump, and still think Trump is a Hail Mary pass. I think things are in reality so bad that you have to take risk. And for me, Trump was a risk. Trump has been hitting the points about how we're taken advantage of in trade. To me, that's huge. I look at trade as asymmetric warfare by the New World Order to basically take America down a few notches so it can be integrated more into the world system while all its organelles are captured in creating that world system that it's being weakened enough to be integrated in. I mean, I'll just lay it all out there. You think I'm a nut conspiracy theorist. There's a lot of good things about globalism. I think I'll save that for another podcast. I'd like to not necessarily throw globalism over the side, but I'd like to have it be different. I'd like it to have it respect people's freedoms and not try to impose a one-size-fits-all on everybody and be more like how we should be, cooperating. People talk about the brotherhood of man, and although in the esoteric Masonic sense, I have problems with that, but the core issue of us all being human beings, all trying to work together, us trying to be peaceful, not all human beings are like that. There's monsters among us, okay? But I think most people are like that. And if we can just dialogue, not create monsters out of each other, not allow moral ambiguity to enter into things. I think, I respect you if you're totally think differently than me, as long as you have some ethical and moral standards. It's when people start wanting their way so much that they're willing to do the end justifies the means and throw the moral standards out and allow corruption, allow a bunch of problems to happen because they're so desperate and wanting to win and to keep winning, that problems are created. And I would argue that's what the left did, and that enabled Trump. They screwed up. And, some people argue if Bernie would have been able to run, he would have won. I think there's probably some truth to that. Again, I preferred Trump over Bernie for various reasons, but I always thought Bernie had a lot of good things to say, some bad things too. But I always thought, I didn't want him in power, but I wanted him around to keep his critiques of the existing regime up, and I still do. I don't know what he's going to do now. So there we have it. So the left, what do you need to do? Well, I won't get into that. I hope you think hard about it, and I hope the Republicans or the conservatives here, which are not necessarily the same thing, the whole word conservative, what it really means now is in flux, because a lot of different groups want to own that word. And, oh well. Everybody should look at this and see some lessons. Fix problems if you can. Republicans let the healthcare system get broke because even though they knew it was broke, they were getting bought by all the big pharma companies and corporations donating their campaign. So they let it get to a point where when the left took power, they tried to fix it, which I think is a disaster. So if they would have just, instead of being corrupt and done something, the whole Obamacare fiasco might have been blunted or avoided completely. So anyway, I think those points show that the left is firmly to blame or to be thanked for allowing Trump to get into power, as much as blue-collar conservatives voting for Trump. And I hope there's lessons learned here. I hope we can maybe use less labels. All through this, I've called leftists liberals. I need to quit using labels too and engage people one-on-one. Try to take the tribalism. If this issue moves forward one way or the other, it'll affect the overall, strength of an ideology as a total. We need to break these little pieces, parts of arguments out and be their own thing, separate from whether they'll be of advantage to one side or another, and just look at them logically rather than politically. I know that'll probably never happen, but that's what we should do. So to my friends and family on the left who might listen to this and you lost, the sun's still going to rise. It was my prayer for one of my relatives. I was about to talk to them, and it just hit me. I hear this person's totally distraught over the election. I hope blessings still happen for you. I hope good things still happen for you. You're not my enemy. I hope you don't view me as your enemy. You might think I'm a little pipsqueak that you want to strangle or whatever. But I'm not your enemy. I actually am trying to do, from my vantage point, what's best for my family, my country, my community. And I'm giving you the credit that, even though I think that you made some really big errors this time around, that if you just step back a little bit, I think you're trying to do the same thing too. You just let the emotionalism of things carry you in directions that should have never been allowed to happen. And if you wouldn't have allowed that to happen, the whole electorate, this whole race, the problems our society faces in general, the landscape could be totally different. We need to all think about that and maybe look at things differently. So I'm rambled on enough. Thank you for listening. If you want to check this out, be on YouTube, SoundCloud, and Spreaker. You can follow me there. I don't know how. You can find me on YouTube at Infocide 2010, INFOCYDE 2010. I'll eventually have this podcast up on Radio Infocide. Once again, radioinfocide.com. Infocide spelled INFOCYDE. That website is just something I threw together from scratch. Shouldn't be viewed as a tour de force of web development skills. I work on it when I can, and it's got a lot of work yet to happen before I would consider it even close to something I'd be proud of. But it's up there. It's something. You can also contact me at either radioinfocide@gmail.com or infocide at radioinfocide.com. Once again, I really appreciate you listening. For the few who made it this far, thank you. Have a good night. I hope it was worth it.